overall understanding of the Bible. So without looking at your notes, now that you all have them, let's do a couple review. How many books are there in the Bible? Ben? 66. How many testaments are in the Bible?
66.
Two. Very good, Lillian. Let's see. How many books are in the Old Testament? Titus.
39.
All right. What's the name of the other testament? CC. New. Good. How many books are in the New Testament? Talara. Close. Titus. 27. Correct. So, 66 books, 39, 27. What are, thinking about the Old Testament, there are three kinds of books in the Old Testament. What are the three kinds of books? Talara, without looking at your notes. Just one. Okay, poetic. Benjamin. Okay, historic. Gideon. Lillian. Titus. Prophetic, right, prophecy. So three kinds of books: historical, poetic, prophetic. Who can name for me all of the poetic books? Anne. There we go. All right. So we talked last week about all of the different kinds of books. We started with the historical books, and we said that there are two kinds of historical books. Anybody remember the two kinds? Benjamin? Primary and Talara? Secondary, right. Primary and secondary. Primary moves the major part of the story along. Secondary restates it, gives some more detail, that kind of stuff. And we talked about all of those kinds of things. What? That's what I said. Yeah, secondary restates it or gives some additional detail. No, not typically. It doesn't move the major storyline of the Bible goes through the primary books. Secondary books give you a restatement, give you a little color, give you some added details, give you some other stuff. All right. We talked about the poetic books. We started talking about the prophetic books last week, is where we left off. And we said there are two kinds of prophetic books. Anybody remember the two kinds of prophetic books? Titus. Major and minor, right. What's the difference? In one word. Joshua. Size or length. I'll take either of those, right. Major prophets are big, long. Minor prophets are short or small. All right. The prophets can also be broken up into the three major periods that they were written in. Prophetic books were written primarily in three periods. Now, some of this, there is going to be, I'm going to give you a couple pieces of information today that'll make a little bit better sense when we get to the arc of the Bible's history. So you have to just kind of buckle up and hang with me here. So the three periods of the prophetic books, the first period are the kingdom prophets. Now, the kingdom prophets wrote when, do you suppose? Talara. During the kingdom era. Right, we'll cover eras in the next lesson. So some of this just, there's no way to avoid the disconnect. But so the kingdom prophets wrote during the kingdom era. They wrote primarily during the time of what book, if you had to guess? The kingdom prophets wrote primarily during the time of what book? We talked about the historical books carry the history of the Bible. All right. The kingdom prophets wrote primarily during the time period of which book of the Bible? Talara. Okay, you're looking at your notes now, which is good. No, you're not. Very good. It is actually during 2 Kings. Is most of these written during the time of 2 Kings. So the kingdom prophets written during, and we're on page, I think, well, it's on 5 of my notes. I'm not sure what page you're on. Kingdom prophets written during the time of 2 Kings. There were some prophets who wrote and spoke to the people of Israel, and these were Hosea and Amos. Luke, sit down. There were prophets who wrote to the kingdom of Judah, the people of Judah, and they were Habakkuk, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Joel, Micah, Zephaniah. There were prophets who went to a foreign group of people called Assyria. Who were the Assyrians? Anybody know? How many of you thought they were the Assyrians? That's correct. They were the Assyrians. The most famous prophet probably we all know went to the Assyrians after he went swimming. Who might that have been? While he was swimming, he got swallowed by a whale. Does that help you figure things out? Talara. Jonah, right. Jonah was called and was really voluntold to go to the people of Assyria. And then Nahum was as well. There was a prophet went to the people of Edom, and that was Obadiah. So those are your kingdom prophets. The next time period of prophets are your exilic prophets. How many of you can say that word? It's fun to say. Exilic. Can you say that? Exilic. I know some of you got to stop talking to each other and try this one. Exilic. 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 Isn't it exciting? So the exilic prophets wrote during the time of the exile, and that is Ezekiel and Daniel. And then post-exilic, when would they have written? After the exile, hence the post-exilic, right? You guys figured this out? And that's Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So did you get bogged down in the prophets? Feeling like that might be a bit much? Don't feel bad. It is a hard one. All right, now let's move on to another testament, shall we? How many of you are ready to move on to the New Testament? All right, the New Testament. How many books are in the New Testament? All right, how many kinds of books do you suppose are in the New Testament? Cece. There's 3 kinds of books, but prophecy isn't broken out into its own. It could be, but it's not typically. So, or at least I didn't. It sometimes is. So the 3 types of books in the New Testament are historical, and then there are a group called the Pauline epistles, and that was written by Paul. I'm just making sure you're paying attention. And then there are the general epistles that were written by the general. Or just by everybody who wasn't Paul. All right, so what do you suppose the historic books of the New Testament might be? Talara? No, but which books of the New Testament do you suppose might be historic? Benjamin? John is a historic book. Talara? Matthew is a historic book. Joshua? Mark is a historic book. Cece? Luke is a historic book. There's one more. Talara? Acts, the book of Acts, is a historic book as well. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell the story of whom? Jesus. The book of Acts tells the story of the early church. And so you get that. Now the Pauline epistles, these are, what is an epistle? It's the wife of an apostle, right? An epistle is just a fancy word for letter. It's a church word for letter. So you could think of these as Paul's letters, and you would be 100% dead on accurate. So the Pauline epistles, they were written to churches, and they were written during the time of the book of Acts. Now what's interesting here, and there's a little bit of a shift, and you'll see it, all of the Pauline epistles are named after the place they were going. So the book of Romans was going to the church at Rome. The books of Corinthians were going to the church at Corinth. The church at the book of Galatians was going to the church at Galatia. The book of Ephesians was going to the church at Ephesus. The book of Philippians was going to the church at Philippi. The church at Colossae, the book of Colossians was going to the church at Colossae. And then the books of Thessalonians were going to the church at Thessalonica. Thessalonica, it's a Greek word. So all of the letters that Paul wrote to churches are named after the city that they were going to. Then Paul wrote some other books that were going to individuals, and those books carry the name of the individual to whom they were going. So you had the books of Timothy written to a guy named Timothy. You have the book of Titus written to a guy named Titus. You have the book of Philemon going to a guy named Philemon. Okay? And so all of Paul's epistles are written, are named after whoever it was going to. Is that pretty cool? Here's where it gets really cool. There is a book called the Book of Hebrews. Who do you think that was written to? Coffee Baristas of America, right? Was written to the Hebrew people. The Book of Hebrews is, a lot of people try to lump that as a general epistle. They're not sure Paul wrote it. A lot of people like to write it, lump it with Paul's letters, thinking that Paul wrote it. I believe Paul wrote it. But what is the title? It's Hebrews. The title is to the people to whom it's going. Now, here's what's interesting about the general epistles. The general epistles are all titled by the person who wrote them, not by the people to which they were going. So your general epistles, you get the book of James written by, who's it written to? Who knows? It's written by James, though. We know that. You get the books of Peter. They're written by, okay. You get the books of John, written by John the Apostle. You get the book of Jude, written by Jude. And then you get the book of the Revelation, written by John. John wrote the book of the Revelation. Yeah, sometimes called the Revelator. All right, so that was easy, right? You get through all of that quickly.